Hello, my friends. This is Lindy. Welcome to the April 29th edition of Lindy's Magpie Reads. I have 3 book clubs in the last week, all still meeting on Zoom instead of in person, but it doesn't happen often that they all converge on the same week. So on Saturday it was my Feminist book club, and we discussed The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. I had been planning to reread that, but there were still so many holds at the library, and fortunately I found 3 pages of notes that I had transcribed from when I was listening to the audiobook back in end of November last year. So I was fine. I had notes. It was good. So one of the things that I took note of was a list of short, perfect novels that was in that book. There's so much about books and reading in there, and I loved her writing style. Here's a sentence as an example. As the season turned, there was a sense of slipping downhill. We skied weightlessly through the days as if they were a landscape of repeating features. Yeah, Louise Erdrich. Okay, so that was Saturday. On Monday night, it was Lesbian Plus Book Club. And for that one, it was also a book that I had read before, but it had been a full year since I read Shadow Life by Hiromi Goto with art by Anne Tsu. So I reread it, and I will definitely read this again. So good. I'm going to tell you more about this later on in this video. And last night it was my YA book club, and we always do 2 books. So one was The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I tried listening to that one 2 years ago, and I liked the beginning, but by the time this guy had been on the island for a couple of days, I could not stand it anymore, and I bailed on that. I just found it kind of gaggy, preachy, too romantic, likely predictable. And the rest of my book club, I think a couple of people quite liked it, but most of the members found it just okay. And the other book that we discussed was Mariko Tamaki's Cold, which is a YA mystery, and I'm going to tell you more about that later. Another book club that I'm participating in is the Book Naturalist Book Club. So that's a booktube thing with Heidi from My Reading Life and Doris from Audiobooks. And the book, it's an author focus this month. And the author is Jennifer Ackerman. So I read her newest book, The Bird Way, subtitled A New Look at How Birds Talk, Work, Play, Parent, and Think. Full of fascinating information. I'll tell you more about that in just a minute. There's the Disability Readathon that's going on with Erin Hawley and Anna G. And I've got a book for that to tell you about. I also read 5 picture books in the last week, and I've got so many other books to tell you about today that I made a separate video for those. So there's 4 of them are wordless, so there's a wordless picture book video linked in the notes down below, part of Picture This Readathon that Jack of Spread Book Joy and Shelley Swearingen are hosting this month. Still one more day, but really, adults read picture books all the time, all year. It's so much fun. Great art. Anyway, I've got 8 other books to tell you about, plus 1 bail. But before I get to that, A couple weeks ago, I read Stone Fruit by Lilai, and I wondered how come this book wasn't more well known. And then I think it was Scott from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot who pointed out that Stone Fruit was on the short list for the Stella Prize, and then more recently I saw that it was on the LA Times Book Prize short list. Wasn't the winner, but still, that handful of books that were finalists, I think all worth your time. And now Lilai has been honored as the National Book Foundation's 5 under 35 authors. So good. A trans Asian Australian author who now lives in Canada, getting lots of attention for their wonderful work. Yay. So, the bird way. One of the cool things that they've learned about birds is that they can pick out a lot of sounds that our ears cannot. And not just because they're outside of our hearing range, but also because they can distinguish sounds more quickly, and it's the same with their vision. So for example, we can watch a video of a bird's mating dance kind of thing and not even be able to see, unless the film is slowed right down, that bird is doing somersaults because they're being done so quickly. That's just one of the many, many interesting things in here. They found out that birds use syntax, compositional syntax, so rules for arranging sounds. And an example that Jennifer Ackerman gives is that in English, watch out makes sense. Outwatch does not. And now they know that it's not only humans that use syntax this way. Birds do it too. And there's examples. Birds in Australia, they survive wildfires, some of them, by either going down a wombat hole or slipping into water. There are stories of people seeking refuge from a fire in a creek, pulling a wet blanket over them, and finding themselves next to one very fancy bird. Talking about lyrebirds here, and they are fancy. Oh, I went down so many internet rabbit holes with this because it doesn't have photos. There's a little drawing in the beginning of each chapter, but that's it. And talking about their eyesight, they have birds have a UV cone in their eyes, and so they can distinguish shades of color that we can't tell apart. So a bird that looks really camouflaged to us could be really distinctive to them. And they can even detect things like the trail of urine left by a vole. There's a picture of the author with, I think that might be a great gray Lapland owl. Those owls are 3 feet tall, and their facial disc is like an antenna for directing the owl towards sound, and even their ear openings are at different heights, so that helps them to pinpoint direction. I had no idea that birds spread fires on purpose. So there are lots of reports of raptors especially who grab burning sticks from fires and drop them in another place so that the fire will flush out their prey. Whoa. So in Sweden, they are doing these intelligence tests with ravens, and there is a wild raven that likes to join in on these tests that they're doing. And so when they're doing experiments, they open the aviary so this bird can fly in, do the experiments, and then they just let her fly off again. A willing participant in these studies. And the ravens love to play. There aren't very many groups of birds that like to play, but corvids and parrots are the two. So there's an anecdote about how young ravens, when they're practicing how to cache food, so hide food, they hop around and stash it in the plumber's crack of the researchers that are working with them. Kias. Oh, I already knew from my time spent on the South Island that I'd heard warnings about Kias and how mischievous they are and destructive. This researcher is talking about how he had a rental car and he made sure that he had full damage coverage. He said, I don't even want to know what they thought when I brought it back. It was just ripped to pieces. He showed me a photo. This is the antenna from that car. It took the Kia 3 minutes to unscrew it. Not strip it off, unscrew it. Yeah. So many interesting things about birds. The Bird Way by Jennifer Ackerman. Next up, I have a collection of children's poetry. It's by a Canadian author, Dionne Brand. She was a teenager when she moved from Trinidad to Canada. And this collection first came out in 1979 from Kids Can Press. But then they reissued it with illustrations by Eugenie Fernandes. And it's just lovely. Very expressionistic paintings that really give you a sense of the landscape and the weather and the culture in Trinidad. I recommend this one, Earth Magic. This book of poetry was not so successful for me. Embodied, an intersectional feminist comics poetry anthology. It's edited by Wendy and Tyler Chin Tanner. I liked a few of the poems. I liked some of the illustrations. So it's an anthology. It's all different poets, all different illustrators. And there were very few that I liked both. I think probably the most successful is one by Caleb Ray Candrilli, To the Cherry Blossoms on 16th and Wharton. And this one is with art by Hazel Newlevant, who also did Sugartown. There's the final page of that. Here I am, whole and sturdy and committed to spring whenever it comes. Yeah, that's me too. Come on, spring. Many of the subjects in here are queer, and so are many of the poets and illustrators. But it just really wasn't my thing. I only gave it 2 stars. I think it would work better for other people. And this was my bail. This is how far I got into it. I'm talking about Unwinding by Jackie Morris. She's an illustrator, and I do love her paintings. And there are short little almost poem-like meditations. And I found I was just kind of bored. I didn't even want to finish it, which was disappointing. Jackie Morris did the illustrations for a couple of books by Robert McFarlane, Lost Words and Lost Spells. As a matter of fact, I have a puzzle from Lost Words, so that's a Jackie Morris illustration there. Magpies, Wendy's Magpie Reads. Yeah, doesn't work, doesn't work. What can I say? So now I'm going to tell you about something I really loved. As I mentioned at the beginning, Shadow Life. So written by Hiromi Goto, who is a Japanese Canadian, and illustrated by Anne Xu, who's a Chinese American. And it is about Kumiko, who's in her 70s, and her 3 daughters are worried because she was not doing well living on her own. They've put her in an old folks home. Kumiko hated it there, so she escapes. She sets up in her own apartment and doesn't tell her daughters where she is. And they're worrying and phoning, and she's not answering. And I was just rooting for Kumiko and also feeling for her daughters. There's that tension of the adult daughters wanting their mother to be safe and their mother wanting to have independence and agency. But death is close. And so there are some kind of supernatural elements where a vacuum cleaner is her tool to fight death. And she can see some things that other people can't. She's able to help other people. We find out that she's bisexual. Her relationship before she was married was with another woman, and that other woman comes back into her life. Oh, if you want a feel-good story about an old Asian Canadian woman, this is it. This is fantastic. The setting is Commercial Drive in Vancouver, which is a very culturally vibrant community. So there's an interesting cast of queer characters, and I cannot recommend this highly enough. Got another Canadian graphic novel here, Rebecca and Lucie, in the Case of the Missing Neighbour. It's by Pascal Girard, who's a Quebec cartoonist. And so this is translated into English by Aleshia Jensen. We have Rebecca and her 8-month-old daughter Lucie. So Rebecca is almost finished her maternity leave. Soon she's going to be going back to work. But she's still up in the middle of the night with her baby. And that's how she spies something going on in the middle of the night in the back alley. And it's not until later, when she hears that one of her neighbors is missing, that she thinks, maybe I did see something important. But the police don't seem to be interested, and so she takes on amateur detective duties with her daughter in tow, and also is doing other things like going to Mother's Fitness in the park, you know, that kind of thing. It's warm, quirky, feel-good mystery. And I'll just give you an idea about the lovely bright watercolor art. There we go. Fun. I had high hopes for Cold. So Mariko Tamaki has written a number of graphic novels, either with her cousin, Jillian Tamaki, and with other artists as well. This was fine. Queer high school student is found dead, and who killed him, kind of thing. That's the mystery. But it's got a lot of praise, apparently, especially within adult mystery readers. So if that's you, give this a try, and you might like it better than I did. And in my book club last night, most of us found that, it was okay. It's not a bad book, but we were wanting more. So, what can I say? There are a couple of things that I took note of just because of other books that I've been reading. So, in the Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Jeffers, there's a crest, a school crest on the floor, and it's taboo to walk on it. That was the first that I had heard of such a thing, but there's one of those in this book as well. When I posted about that on Lucie, I discovered that many other educational institutions have such a taboo, but it was new to me. And the other thing I took note of was on the opening page, where she talks about her mother who writes kids' books, including a retelling of Hansel and Gretel, and just how embarrassing that is to be seen as the character in her mother's books. So Hansel and Gretel came up in the candy house as well. That's actually where the title comes from, if you don't know. It was in a scene where the daughters of a music executive, was in the era of Napster and downloading music from the internet. And the daughters said, "Nothing's free. Only children expect otherwise. Fairy tales warn us. Never trust a candy house." I do trust this one, though. Oh, Jennifer Egan. I love her books. I love stories that are told with multiple stories. Actually, each story in here stands alone. So interconnected stories that are also connected to her book, A Visit from the Goon Squad. Another book that I loved. I read it twice. This one I listened to in audio, full cast, superb. And then the day that I finished listening to the audio, this print copy came in for me at the library. So I flipped through it, found passages that I liked. I especially wanted to see some of the way that the words look on the page for some of the sections. So for example, there's Lulu, who has spyware in her eye and in her ear, and she's out in the field, and she speaks in second person aphorisms, I guess. There's another chapter, it's related to Lulu actually, where it's all email conversations. Oh, I went down some other rabbit holes with this one, like teeny tiny scissors special ordered from Germany so that the label in new clothing could be cut out with each little tiny stitch, that kind of thing. I hate labels in clothes too, the scratchy kind, yeah, fabulous. And speaking of Hansel and Gretel, I know that Jeanette Winterson has a book out already. I think it came out in January, a kid's book called Hansel and Greta. and it's part of the Fairy Tale Revolution series. I could special order it if I want to read it, and then I could pass it along to one of my great nieces. But I'm wondering, have any of you read Hansel and Gretel? And what did you think of it? I'd love to know. And do you think I would like it? Last book. It's an audiobook. The Invisible Kingdom, Reimagining Chronic Illness by Meghan O'Rourke. And it is read by the author. I transcribed a bunch of notes in my commonplace book. So Meghan O'Rourke had quite a journey with autoimmune disease. So O'Rourke had a lot of really interesting things to say about chronic illness, like about metaphors and how they shape the way we think. So if antibodies are soldiers fighting off germs, then autoimmune processes become cases of mistaken friendly fire. How not to interrogate the psychological implications of that. She says the American affection for positive thinking reflects a desire for illness stories to have neat resolutions and uplifting moral outcomes. So she's looking for a more nuanced discourse. She says she wants to have the dignity of one's own reality. This is why I worked so hard to find language to tell my story. I wanted to show how the emphasis on the psychological nature of chronic illness in a culture that pathologizes the failure to overcome robbed people of grace, while instructing them to suffer their illness with grace. Very well-written, intriguing, moving memoir about illness. And hashtag Disability Readathon. So that's it for my Friday reads. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. And I love hearing what you have to say in the comments. Say hi down below. Bye for now.